I'm glad you came tonight. Let's make a few observations. First of all, this is the AM coffee print, discovered in 1955. A trail of 9 of them in Permian rock. Permian. Geologist, Phil. How old is Permian supposed to be? Just bracket it.
Well, it's older than the dinosaur ages.
Oh, yes, according to evolutionary theory. And like you told me last night, that's a lot older than I would assign that rock. According to evolutionary theory, Permian rock is supposed to be 228 million to 256 million years old, or 256 to 228 million years old. Older than the earliest dinosaur era, Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, the dinosaur progressive eras, according to evolutionary theory. We have to use those references in order to show that they're not correct, but we have to be familiar with those references. According to evolution, this is early Permian, about 250 million years old, according to evolutionary theory. Now, according to evolutionary theory, the dinosaurs didn't appear until 228 million, progressively grew more complicated through the Triassic, the Jurassic, and then the Cretaceous, and disappeared about 64 million years ago with Tyrannosaurus rex, according to evolution. According to that theory, the earliest dawn man appeared a little over 2.5 million years ago. 2.5 million years ago. Very primitive, very flat-footed, barely able to walk upright. And about 40,000 years ago, depending on which textbook, which professor, who wants to outdo the other, but about 40,000 years ago, man became so sophisticated and so developed that his sensitive second toe became pronounced. What's so important about this second toe? In the middle of the night, it's the one you stub when you get up and go through the dark to go to the bathroom. It is the most sensitive of all the toes. The second toe, in about 60% of the cases, is longer anatomically than the great toe, the first big toe. The second toe feeds more information neurologically to the brain than any other toe. And against resistance, such as walking in mud, often the neck rides higher and the point dips just a little bit. That is on your Homo sapiens sapien, modern, intelligent, best of the lot that was ever born, toe, according to that theory. How am I doing? 20 minutes? About 20 minutes. Well, I need a lot of slack. Okay, watch. If you will look closely, there's the great toe, second, third, fourth little toe, the ball of the foot, the medial section of the longitudinal arch, the calcaneus section, the lateral section of the longitudinal arch, the metatarsal arch. We have 3 arches, one there, and one there. If you look closely, that second toe dips even deeper than the great toe. A modern individual made that. It's in Permian rock. That Permian rock, where this was found, in north, central, west Texas, near Stinnett, is a part of that 11-state area covered rapidly in a huge flood. And slightly above that, you have that Cretaceous layer that runs worldwide. We're talking about a worldwide flood. Now watch, there's the great toe, sensitive second toe, ball of the foot, medial arch, metatarsal arch, lateral arch, the heel section. That is a human footprint. Now here's the technical spiral CT scan of that coffee print. This is just one of over 1,400 sections that we ran. I just picked one of them. Watch closely. Here's the lateral section of the foot. Where it is white, that is greater compression, greater density, because the X-ray is having to run through the rock. Now, listen to me very carefully. In 1918, an eccentric genius named Ernest Talbert Adams, who's the only man to have memorized the entire book of logarithms, someone asked him why he did it. He said, I just got tired of looking them up. He was a Glen native, Ernest Talbert Adams, a giant of a man, and nicknamed Bull Adams because he played 3 downs at Baylor University in his first college career. Then he went to Cambridge, to Oxford after that. The refs weren't doing right. Baylor was playing Texas University. The refs were a little prejudiced. The team walked off, all except Bull Adams, this eccentric genius. And he said to the refs, I'll stay until my team gets back if you'll make the other guys run straight at me. They tried 3 plays, never made a single yard of advantage in 3 plays. Then his team came back and they finished the game. Anyhow, Bull Adams, he had the right name. But he was an eccentric genius, an incredibly intelligent individual. He discovered in 1918 the first human footprints and verified they were genuine human footprints among the dinosaur footprints. His brother decided, and they took a few out and sold them during the Depression. So his brother decided it was easier to carve them under a shade tree than to dig them out of the river, because that was hard work. He carved about 3 human footprints, about half a dozen dinosaur footprints, sold them, buried one of the human footprints, and it was recently discovered or rediscovered. And we put that original human footprint that he carved under spiral CAT scan and no compression density. We can determine the difference between a genuine footprint and a carved footprint because of the compression density and the forward locomotion. Watch closely. We don't walk like zombies like that. We don't walk like that. Our brain and the coordination in conjunction with the second toe and the forward locomotion that our Creator placed within our disposition, we do the following. We step on the outside of the foot, we transfer that to the medial inside, transfer that through the central portion and out through the toes. This footprint and the others that we have discovered show very clearly that feature. That is compression transferred to the left side. Where it's white, it is more dense. Transferred to the medial section and out the front of the foot. That's only one of a number of spiral CAT scans verifying the same thing. If you were to look closely, and the lamp is not bright enough closely, you can see the compression under the actual toes. Compression again. The lighter section, the contrast is not real good here. How do you explain? Population statistics. Let's get through this because I have about 15 minutes, and that takes a lot of reading. Population statistics date back only a few thousand years, but that is an involved study. I want to get to more of the artifacts where I live and work. How to explain soft tissue in dinosaur bones? I'm sure your lecturers have discussed that. Soft tissue in dinosaur bones. They're completely rewriting the texts, and it was in this great state that the soft tissue was first found in a T-Rex bone. Dr. Carl Whalen gave an excellent explanation, but I don't have time to go to this because I want to get to the actual artifacts with which I am more familiar, the arena in which I live, and I want to keep you on time. So, aren't you glad I didn't read all of that? Scientists have discovered soft tissue in a T-Rex bone they say is 70 million years old. 70 million years? No way. I can't get a turkey sandwich to survive 3 weeks. And that's correct. That has to be recent. Polonium-214, I'm sure you've had numerous discussions, so we'll not go through this. We want to get to creation artifacts, and I'll close with this. 2 hours and 20 minutes from now. No, I'll keep on time. The creation artifacts, because this is the arena where I live. The geologic ages and the artifacts. In Miocene, Oligocene, human skull was found, a shoe print was found, skull, a skeleton. In all of these eras, epochs, and periods of time, evidence of human occupation has been discovered. Now let's discuss some of these. We have these. I excavated that original print with a human footprint right in the middle of a dinosaur track along the Biloxi River. The great toe, all the other toes, the ball of the foot, the medial arch. Here's a human handprint. This human handprint was discovered near Palo Pinto, Texas, in mid-Cretaceous rock that is assigned an age by evolutionists, geologically assigned an age of 110 million years. But it has a human handprint of an individual who apparently caught himself. You don't narrow your hand, you broaden your hand if you're catching yourself. In so doing, he recorded the thumbnail and the longer digit that stuck into the mud that lithified later. That digit recorded even the fingernail. But what surprised me when our technician, our certified mold maker, poured a latex mold into this to recast, he called me and he said, "I can't believe it." He said not only did the thumbnail record, but where the long central digit thrust into the mud, the fingernail there recorded as well, and the fingernail was trimmed. Those were not unintelligent people. The fingernail was trimmed. Either that, or in the trauma of the flood where he had found he missed the boat, he chewed his fingernails off. I have no idea, and I have great sympathy for him, but it's a little late. Watch. We have this finger. It's on display. This is on display. These are all on displays. This is a spiral CAT scan of one particular image. This finger. We have the fingernail, the cuticle, the taper. That taper is feminine. The head of a university science department was able to say, and he's a specialist in anatomy, it's the fourth finger on the left hand of a girl. It's that precise. Fourth finger on the left hand of a girl. How do you know it's a girl? For the following reasons. First, the taper. We men tend to have a blunt finger. Ladies have a greater taper. I see you men looking at your fingers. What's this? There's a flattened spot just ahead of the cuticle at the back of the fossilized fingernail. A flattened spot. Once every 28 days, a lady normally or quite often has a beneficial bacterium that causes that area to flatten. A beneficial bacterium. Originally, I think all bacteria were beneficial, but that's another story. Men, you don't get that flattened area. There's not too much beneficial about we men, right? Bacteria or otherwise. So that indicates that it's feminine. Here we have the replaced bone. We ran another more sensitive spiral CAT scan, the replaced cartilaginous ligaments. It has the medial, distal, and proximal joints. It is genuine. It is a human fossilized finger found in the same layer with the dinosaur footprints and dinosaur bones, assigned an age of 110 million years. Are those 110 million years genuine? Absolutely not. They're simply assigned. These are during epochs of the worldwide flood. This is the famous hammer, the London artifact. This is found in early Cretaceous rock in central Texas, and the metal cannot be totally reproduced today. If you look very closely, there's a shiny area right there. That is char. A portion of the handle is colified. This was impacted into rock under great pressure, into mud under great pressure. I took this to Battelle Laboratory in Columbus, Ohio. That's the same lab that analyzed the original moonstones. I used the same lab, the same instrument, the same technician as analyzed the original moonstones. Ran a scanning electron microprobe elemental analysis, a beam of electrons streaming down into the metal. Found it was 96.6% iron, 0.4% sulfur, and 2.6% chlorine. You're a physical chemist. Chlorine compounded with iron. Then it has a slight amount of carbon. We cannot compound chlorine with iron today. And by the way, we had another tomographic analysis run, and they said this is the most homogeneous implement we've ever seen. Those were not unintelligent people. Whoever made that missed the boat, by the way. It was dropped in Central Texas. Yes, there were people in Central Texas at that time. Let's look at more of the artifacts and close this out. This is the cup. That cup was found in 1928 by Frank Kennard near Sulphur City, Oklahoma. He was performing an admirable job. He had the midnight shift to keep the power plant going to generate electricity, and he was shoveling coal. There was a huge block of coal. He tried to get it in the furnace, couldn't. So he took a sledge and whacked that huge block of coal. It shattered. Out fell that cup. The sides of the coal showed the crevices. A residue of the coal is still in the bottom of the cup. He put the cup on a ledge, threw the coal in the furnace. I wish he had kept the coal, but he kept the cup, took it home. We now have it at the Creation Evidence Museum. And it's a major problem for evolutionary theorists. Now, we have the Cambrian. We'll close with this artifact. Okay, let's go back because that's the only photo I have. This is possibly the most valuable single artifact in the world. It is more valuable than the crown of the Queen of England. This artifact answers the four great questions of life. In the philosophy department at every major university worldwide, these four questions are discussed, but no answers are ever derived. These questions are, who am I? Where did I come from? Life origins. What's my purpose here? And where am I going? This artifact answers those. It was discovered by William Meister, 1952, in Cambrian rock. He was looking for trilobites. Cambrian is assigned an age 570 million years. Assigned an age 570 million years. It's at the bottom of the geologic column, just above the granite, in the Cambrian explosion of life. According to evolutionary theory, the basic life forms appeared suddenly, then you have a progression, but at the top, man appeared. Watch. William Meister and his wife Mabel found their trilobites, two of them. That's an Elrathia gingai trilobite and Elrathia gingai trilobite. They flipped the top off, found the trilobites, but to their absolute amazement, this is not a good photo, but I'll describe what's going on. It's an 8.5-inch long sandal print with a stitching still intact along the sandal. Where? Along the outside of the heel, the right side, it's a right footprint. The rounded toe, you see the original. It is a human sandal print made by an intelligent individual or his wife, made by an intelligent person, worn. This individual missed the boat. It's at the bottom of the geologic column. This one artifact puts the entire geologic column into one time frame in the recent past. It tells where you came from. It tells who you are. You're an individual made original in the image of God. It tells where you came from. You came from His creative hand of design and compassion. It tells what your purpose here. Your purpose is to recognize and represent your Creator. It tells where you're going. You're going to meet Him one way or another. That single sandal print totally destroys evolutionary theory. Leading evolutionary scholars have admitted that if we could find a horse fossil in the Cambrian, it would wipe it out. We've done better than that. We found evidence of human occupation in the very bottom of the geologic column. Therefore, you did not arrive by evolutionary progression and development. You arrived by the directive, purpose, and direct hand of Almighty God. Now, let's take a few questions. It is right on time, 8:30. Isn't that wonderful? Yes, sir. Question.
I had heard that when you find fossils, like dinosaur fossils and things like that, that typically you find that
Would you start the question again? They're
Yeah.
taping the session.
when you find a fossil, I had heard that if you find something like a dinosaur fossil of some piece of the dinosaur, that you get very little of the dinosaur. Like a T-Rex, you might get one bone of the T-Rex. And yet, you go to these museums and you see a complete T-Rex, and they tell you that it's, that's a dinosaur that was excavated from so-and-so and everything else. And I guess my question is it true that there's only pieces of that are the original T-Rex and everything else was put together by people using,
Vivid imagination?
their imagination?
Very good question. That is relatively true. Many dinosaurs are discovered from a single bone. In fact, the original Ceratosaurus, that has to do with a horn nose on the head of a dinosaur that looked much like an Allosaurus or a T-Rex. I understand the original Ceratosaurus was from a single bone. There have been very few complete dinosaurs discovered. The Acrocanthosaurus that I discovered along the banks of the Biloxi River was 40% complete. Anything that's 25% or more is considered to be a complete dinosaur. Now, there's a reason for this. There is an academic reason for this. It is true that some of the dinosaurs they've discovered from a bone or a few bones have a lot of imagination and philosophic design in them. They've had to retrace some of those because they turned out to be variations of the same species. But if you really know your paleontology, there are structures, if you have just a few bones, there are things that can be told about those bones or by those bones, data derived from those bones, that can give you a pretty good idea. There is a lot of license going on and a lot of imagination going on. They've had to retract a lot of that and decrease the number of species. Dinosaurs, new ones are being found in China every week. But it is true that many dinosaurs are derived from a single bone or a few bones. And it is true that a lot of that is imagination, but simultaneously, it is true that a good paleontologist can look at a few bones and because of his experience and because of the placement of those bones, give you a pretty good approximation about what that dinosaur looked like in his anatomical structure. They've made a lot of mistakes. They don't readily admit those mistakes. When we make mistakes, and we do, they point those out worldwide, you know, and it's broadcast. Yes, your question is an intelligent question. The answer is yes, but the answer is sometime there's justification for getting a pretty good idea. We have some dinosaur skin from Bolivia. And while we're waiting for that question from Matt, this dinosaur skin tells a lot. It's an ankylosaur portion of skin. We have the dermis and the epidermis. This is extremely rare. Normally you get impressions, or normally you get residue. From Colorado, I have the privilege of being the discoverer and the director of the excavations of 16 different dinosaurs. But Joe Taylor and some other good people have done most of the work. The director doesn't get the privilege of doing much of the work. He has to make sure people don't throw hammers at other people, you know, etc. Back to this ankylosaur skin. This skin has rosette patterns. Rosette patterns are shown when you have a little petal like a rose petal. Jutting from that, you have other petals. Jutting from them, you have others, so no matter which one you take, it's a rosette. It's a flower pattern. So these dinosaurs could have been beautiful things. What really surprised me, it had some bumps on the ankylosaur. You know the ankylosaur, don't you? That's the fellow with a knob on his tail, and brutal looking and dumb looking. And so you would think this guy would just brush his way through the mobs. But watch. There's some protrusions, some bumps on that skin. We have a portion of skin about that big. So we ran a spiral CAT scan analysis on it. To my absolute amazement, these bumps were not hard and abrasive. They were hard in that they were completely fossilized, but they were hollow. He had bubble wrap on his skin to keep him from abrasing his buddy, or etc. These creatures were intelligently designed. Dinosaurs are wonderful creatures. Yes, you had a question.
What's happening in your hyperbaric chamber?
Okay, well, I could spend an entire 3-hour lecture. Let's see if I can do this in 2 minutes. We spent hours this morning, Dr. Boudreau and I spent hours talking about our concept of the pre-flood world. In fact, we probably should close on this question. Should we? Because it's going to take me a few minutes. But I'd like to give you a real answer. Let me put this down so I can use both my hands. Thanks, Bill. I hold patents on the world's first hyperbaric biosphere. What is that? It is a chamber simulating, not duplicating, I was not there to measure it, simulating the pre-flood world. Simulating it as best we can. We know from various factors that we had greater atmospheric pressure, greater ratio of oxygen, greater ratio of carbon dioxide. What difference would that make? This is the reason this is the last question. I'll have to explain. If you add atmospheric pressure and you increase the oxygen ratio, you solve some major problems. The hemoglobin of the bloodstream is saturated with 4 oxygen molecules. No matter how much oxygen you give that patient on the surface, can't do much good because it's saturated with 4 oxygen molecules. But if you increase the atmospheric pressure, it drives that oxygen into the blood plasma and saturates the blood plasma. My wife is an environmental reactor. That's the reason she's not here. She can't tolerate the carpet here. She can't tolerate perfumes, hairsprays, colognes, anything like that. She has trouble tolerating me, you know. If I've been with someone who has been smoking, I walk in, she says, wait a minute, you're going to have to go outside and change clothes. Well, hon, I can't change. You're not coming in here like that, you know, because it'll devastate her. She was at the point where the medical doctors, I'd had her to 17 specialists at that point. She's a universal reactor. She was down to skin and bones. The medical doctors said, you're going to lose her. And I said to Dr. William Ray, an environmental specialist, Dr. Ray, I'm doing research on hyperbaric oxygen in answer to Matt's question. I'm doing research on hyperbaric oxygen. Can you make arrangements to get my wife in a hyperbaric oxygen facility? Hyperbaric, greater atmospheric pressure. Oxygen, greater concentration of oxygen. They don't give you 100% oxygen over long periods of time because you can build up oxygen toxicity. So he said, I don't know what good it'll do, but I'll make arrangements. So we made arrangements with Dr. William Fife, Texas A&M, and went down. They made a special helmet for my wife, go over her face, a special rubber plastic apron to fit the contour because they were going to give oxygen only to her face. But Dr. Fife wanted me to go in because he had heard about the chamber that we're building at Glen that you asked about, and he wanted to know more about it. He ended up being one of our consultants. He was the former head of the entire biology department at the entire university, but he wanted to be one of our consultants on our team. That's pretty good, Ed. So he's with the Lord now, and he knew the Lord, but he was a great scientist, published worldwide in hyperbaric medicine. Okay, back to the context. We went in. It took 22 treatments. They would close the door, pump us up to 2 atmospheres of pressure, essentially what we had before the flood, a little extra. They would give my wife 100% oxygen for a short period of time. Now again, I want to emphasize, you can't live under 100% oxygen. You'll build up oxygen toxicity. But for a quick recovery, that's what they need. It would saturate the entire blood plasma, drive the oxygen to the deep cell tissue of my wife's sick body, and over a period of 4 to 6 months, she was able to function. She's still alive, and I'm very thankful for that. I love her dearly. So, one day we went in, took 22 treatments. I was in 16 of those. He let me go in free. I didn't have a helmet because that cost money. But he said, I want to talk to you. I want to know what's going on at the museum, just like you asked. So I would tell him as my wife was taking the treatments. This one time, I wheeled my wife in the wheelchair. Dr. Fife said, Martha, what's that on your foot? I said, she said, I spilled hot water on it yesterday. It'll be all right. He said, that's an open, oozing wound. She said, yeah, but it'll be all right. He said, we'll take care of it. Do we have a medical doctor here tonight? Do we have a nurse here tonight? Good, good. Do we have anyone who's ever paid for a wing of a hospital, one illness at a time? Quite a few of us. All right. Nurses, tell me, on average, if the patient is well, and my wife was not well, if the patient is well, how long does it take to heal an open wound? Let's get 2 opinions here. One, first opinion. It'll be the right opinion. Yeah, you're exactly right. Now let's see. What, nurses? A couple of weeks. 10 days to 3 weeks, depending on the health of the individual. It's a couple of weeks, at least 10 days. So here was my wife in poor health. The doctors thought we were going to lose her. And Dr. Fife looked at that oozing open wound and he said, we'll take care of that. We went in, closed the hatch. He put the helmet on my wife, ran the oxygen tube, turned it on. They were monitoring us from outside. You do need outside monitoring in case the hatch doesn't work. you know. So we adjusted, used station tubes, etc. You have to do all of that. And he ran the oxygen into my wife's face, and she was breathing pure oxygen for a limited period of time. Then he ran a secondary oxygen line past my wife's ankle to the foot, performed a very sophisticated medical procedure. He took a plastic bag, enveloped my wife's foot and ankle, crimped it, took duct tape and wrapped it up. I thought that was very ingenious. And then he turned the oxygen on. He sat back and he said, "Okay, now tell me what's going on at the museum. What about your biosphere?" So I started talking. 45 minutes later, my wife tapped me on the shoulder and she said through the helmet, "I've had enough oxygen." "Okay," Dr. Fife heard her too. He went up and turned off both lines, took the helmet off her face, and she smiled. Then he knelt down. Now, how long does it take for an open wound to heal? A couple of weeks, 10 days at least. He knelt down. How long had it been? 45 minutes. He knelt down, unwrapped the duct tape, unpeeled the plastic bag, and that wound was completely closed, a beautiful pink, in 45 minutes. He inadvertently, and those doing that research, are simulating to a degree the pre-flood world. I'm not saying we had 100% oxygen. In fact, we had about 25% ratio compared to 21 today. We had about 22 pounds per square inch of atmospheric pressure. We know that from various parameters. We had additional things. We had stronger, tenfold stronger electromagnetic field energy. We had filtration of the ultraviolet B, the very damaging ultraviolet. We had filtration of the wavelength of light. We had the humidity appropriate. We had sound faculties involved, and all of that's involved in some patents that I hold. So, all of that to say that we built a biosphere to put living systems in. We ran it for a decade. The results were far better than I ever imagined. So we closed it. We have now opened the enlarged Creation Evidence Museum facility. We have a large chamber, weighs 92,000 pounds, it's 48 feet long, and 11.5-inch ID diameter. We are now building the permanent biosphere. A biosphere is different from a hyperbaric chamber. A hyperbaric chamber simply adds pressure and it adds oxygen ratio. We add the pressure, appropriate pressure, oxygen ratio, carbon dioxide ratio, the humidity, the sound, the light, and a number of other parameter factors. What have been the results? We built a small one first, 7 feet long, 4 foot diameter. We put a Kedrodon contortrix and a Grotilis there. What are those? Rattlesnakes and copperheads. We put them in. We also use the standard study with fruit flies. Now, these fruit flies were standard field fruit flies. And as we use them, we didn't use any exotic food. We simply put them under this context with pulsed electromagnetic energy, the pressure, the oxygen ratio, et cetera, et cetera. When we put them under this context, Bill, were you there when we had the fruit flies? Pardon me? You only saw the copperheads and the rattlesnakes. Okay. So we ran these experiments with the fruit flies, and in the second generation, we tripled the adult lifespan of the fruit flies just by having them in that context. Now, the life of a fruit fly is normally 14 days from egg to larva to pupa, 14 days in the adult phase, and they die shortly thereafter, or on the 14th day or before. But just by putting them in a pre-flood context, as best we can interpret it, we triple the adult lifespan in the second generation, even with their damaged DNA. That's the equivalent of your living to be 200 years in age, even with your damaged DNA. But the most exotic test we ran, Bill saw those in motion, the copperheads and the rattlesnakes. We put them in, and I had predicted, you see, scientific work must have a control group and must be able to make predictions. As Bill and I discussed, as Ed and I discussed today, most scientific breakthroughs are serendipitous. That means they're accidental. We're not smart enough to predict what really will go on, but we make a stab at it and we think it's going to happen. I had said that in the third generation, we should be able to see a difference in the snake venom, but I was wrong. Have you ever looked at snake venom under scanning electron analysis? It looks like this: gnarled spaghetti. It's because of the sulfide bonds and the frayed ends of the proteins because of the accumulation of metals. Looks like that. It's all frayed. So when a snake bites you, did you know that snake venom is the most complicated protein structure in biological nature? It has an average of 100 different proteins. And they each serve a purpose, but not in the snake, but in his venom. What's it for? Well, they have a hypodermic needle to vaccinate you. Watch closely. Looks like that. After 4 weeks in the biosphere, we milked the control group and we milked the biospheric snakes. Now, are you still awake? It's getting late, but you must get this. I say, we milk them? I'm the director of the project. There's certain things you delegate. So my best buddy is Robert Summers, the world-famous artist who sculpted John Wayne and Byron Nelson, etc. And I delegated that to him, you know. I mean, he wanted to. And the one actually doing the milking was Robert Popperwell, Ph.D., a specialist in this area. He grows snakes, etc., etc. That's not my cup of tea. Anyhow, we milk the snake, the biospheric group and the control group. We took the venom to an independent lab in Dallas. They called me to the lab, and they said, we can't believe this. They said, you've got to let us publish on this, but I have not yet permitted that to be done. They said, look, here's your control group with the gnarled spaghetti venom. But they said, look, the biospheric group of both Echidrodon, Contortrix, and Agrodalus are structured. The frayed bonds are not there, the frayed proteins. Theoretically, we have rendered them more potent, but we have rendered them non-poisonous, theoretically. But watch this. I'm going to divert for a moment. We're almost finished. We had these snakes under greater atmospheric pressure. We had them under elevated oxygen and carbon dioxide. But we had them primarily under pulsed electromagnetic energy, and we knew the exact range to put them under. That's very important. Some work that encouraged me in this area was done by Wycliffe Bible translators. I'm going to give you a secret, and then I'm going to take you back to the snake venom. Wycliffe Bible translators send stun guns with all their missionaries into the fields. Do you have any rattlesnakes in Colorado? Yes. I recommend, we don't sell, but I recommend that you buy a stun gun. I have one in my car at the airport. I carry it with me at all times. You can't get it on a plane. I got it. Somebody's still awake. That's good. They found that if you will take a stun gun, if you're bitten, now, I'm not giving you medical advice. See, I'm not qualified to give you medical advice. But I'm telling you what they do. If you're bitten, they take the probes of the stun gun, attach them, pull the trigger, and then do it another 2 or 3 times and go on about your business. It neutralizes the venom. If you lived under a context with greater electromagnetic energy, I'm not saying we lived under that kind of stun gun energy before the flood. We didn't. But if you lived under gently increased pulsed DC current electromagnetic energy, the snakes would be non-venomous. And there are many, many takeoffs of that. Illustration, I was lecturing on that in the museum. I was not giving medical advice. One of the instructors at Wycliffe Bible Translators came up to me after the lecture and he said, you're going to like this. He said, I'm from Wycliffe Bible Translators up in Duncanville. And he said, just this week we got a letter. Just this week we got a letter from India. The missionary was teaching the men on the compound. It's the caste system. The missionary's wife was teaching the women across the compound. One of the native women came dragging, pulling his stumbling wife by the arm. His wife was stumbling. And the national woman said, she'd die, she'd die. He looked, and the crate snake had bitten her on the wrist. Do you know what the crate snake is? Well, it was worse than the cobra. It's the 2-step snake. Once you're bitten, you got 2 steps. Then you lose coordination. 20 minutes later, you're dead. No exceptions. 2-step snake. And there she was. Her wrist was swelling. She had been bitten by the crate snake. And the national woman said, she'd die, she'd die. The missionary stood up, reached to his belt, pulled off his stun gun, smiled, put the probes to his wife's wrist, pulled the trigger, and the battery was dead. So he quickly pulled her over to his motorcycle, pulled off the plug wire, put it to the wrist, yanked a couple of times. 20 minutes later, she was teaching the women again. There's something to this. I recommend you carry a stun gun with you. Now, final application. Back to our study. If you really get this, it's going to be worth your coming. I haven't told my dear friend Ed about this yet. We milked the snakes, took the venom back to the lab the second time. The PhD in charge of the program said, we're going to run an electrophoresis analysis. Good. He called me the next week and said, you got to come up here. You got to come up here. We've got 3 PhDs on this, and we're all stunned. He said, you have to let us publish on this. Not yet. He said, look, here's the control group. Here's the biospheric group, or just one of each. He said, I ran the Western blot electrophoresis test. Do you know what that is? You know, it's a series of protein expressions. What's that?
It's sort of like a chromatic graphic.
Yes, chromatic separation. Columns. They use that for O.J. Simpson to determine he was there. Okay, so there were 2 columns. He said, here's your control group, the control venom. Here's your biospheric venom. What's this? He said, in this instance, comparing these directly across, same creature, he said, you have enhanced this protein expression. That's like saying you're growing a little more hair on this guy. Pretty good. He said, In this one, you have, in the biosphere, diminished this protein expression. That's like saying you've taken off his warts. Are you still with me? Protein expression. He said, look here. In this protein expression from the control, you have eliminated this in the biospheric snake. Isn't that nice? You get rid of some things you didn't want at all. But he said, this is what threw us. You have expressed a protein that is not expressed in the control venom. You know what that means? The information is already there. That new information that made him more viable or whatever did not come by an evolutionary process, but the environmental factors caused the expression of information that had to be there in the genetic code in order to be expressed. That destroys evolutionary progression. The information has to be in place to be expressed.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Very exciting. By the way, the stun gun also works on spider bites.
Yes. In order to show that they're not correct, but we have to be familiar with those references. According to evolution, this is early Permian, about 250 million years old, according to evolutionary theory. Now, according to evolutionary theory, the dinosaurs didn't appear until 228 million, progressively grew more complicated through the Triassic, the Jurassic, and then the Cretaceous, and disappeared about 64 million years ago with Tyrannosaurus rex, according to evolution. According to that theory, the earliest dawn man appeared a little over 2.5 million years ago. 2.5 million years ago. Very primitive, very flat-footed, barely able to walk upright. And about 40,000 years ago, depending on which textbook, which professor, who wants to outdo the other, but about 40,000 years ago, man became so sophisticated and so developed that his sensitive second toe became pronounced. I'm glad you came tonight. Let's make a few observations. First of all, this is the AM coffee print, discovered in 1955. A trail of 9 of them in Permian rock. Permian. Geologist, Phil. How old is Permian supposed to be? Just bracket it.
Well, it's older than the dinosaur ages.
Oh, yes, according to evolutionary theory. And like you told me last night, that's a lot older than I would assign that rock. According to evolutionary theory, Permian rock is supposed to be 228 million to 256 million years old, or 256 to 228 million years old. Older than the earliest dinosaur era, Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, the dinosaur progressive eras, according to evolutionary theory. We have to use those references in one there and one there. If you look closely, that second toe dips even deeper than the great toe. A modern individual made that. It's in Permian rock. That Permian rock where this was found in north, central, west Texas near Stinnett is a part of that 11-state area covered rapidly in a huge flood And slightly above that, you have that Cretaceous layer that runs worldwide. We're talking about a worldwide flood. Now watch, there's the great toe, sensitive second toe, ball of the foot, medial arch, metatarsal arch, lateral arch, the heel section. That is a human footprint. Now here's the technical spiral CT scan of that coffee print. This is just one of over 1,400 sections that we ran. I just picked one of them. Watch closely. Here's the lateral section of the foot. Where it is white, that is greater compression, greater density, because the X-ray is having to run through the rock. Now, listen to me very carefully. In 1918, an eccentric genius named Ernest Talbert Adams, who's the only man to have memorized the entire book of logarithms, someone asked him why he did it. He said, I just got tired of looking them up. He was a Glen native, Ernest Talbert Adams, a giant of a man, and nicknamed Bull Adams because he played 3 downs at Baylor University in his first college career. Then he went to Cambridge, to Oxford after that. The refs weren't doing right. Baylor was playing Texas University. The refs were a little prejudiced. The team walked off, all except Bull Adams, this eccentric. What's so important about this second toe? In the middle of the night, it's the one you stub when you get up and go through the dark to go to the bathroom. It is the most sensitive of all the toes. The second toe, in about 60% of the cases, is longer anatomically than the great toe, the first big toe. The second toe feeds more information neurologically to the brain than any other toe. And against resistance, such as walking in mud, often the neck rides higher and the point dips just a little bit. That is on your Homo sapiens sapien, modern, intelligent, best of the lot that was ever born toe, according to that theory. How am I doing? 20 minutes? About 20 minutes. Well, I need a lot of slack. Okay, watch. If you will look closely, there's the great toe, second, third, fourth little toe, the ball of the foot, the medial section of the longitudinal arch, the calcaneus section, the lateral section of the longitudinal arch, the metatarsal arch. We have 3 arches, one there,